Hey, April. Hi. Sorry, we can't hear you right now, April. Do you want to check your microphone real quick and start over?
Thank you so much. All right, and just a quick reminder for any of our other presenters, just please make sure that your microphone is muted. Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. Let's start this again. Thank you for joining the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy's first ever summer education series. We're so grateful to have your time and attention for the next hour as we dive into today's session, addressing the emotional impact coping with peripheral neuropathy. Here at FPN, we're dedicated to improving the lives of those affected by peripheral neuropathy through awareness, education, advocacy, and research to advance the discovery of new therapies and cures. Your participation today helps demystify what it means to have neuropathic pain and helps make our patient community more aware of and engaged with their diagnosis. My name is April Hubert, and I am proud to serve as webinar moderator and director of development here at the Foundation. I'm honored to represent the premier resource for information, research, and advocacy surrounding the individual and collective experience with PN. Thanks again for tuning into our summer web series, session 3 of 6. Before we dive in today, I have 3 reminders for you. 1, yes, this session is being recorded. It will be emailed to you after the program and posted on our website in the coming days. The slide deck will also be available. 2, for those participating in the live session today, we will have a Q&A towards the end of our time together. Please be sure to use the questions box to submit your question, and we will try to get to as many as possible. Please submit questions about today's topic and refrain from sharing any personal medical information. And number 3, if you are having audio issues like we were in the very beginning, you can dial in by phone using the instructions sent to your email. Remember, this session is being recorded and you can always view it at a later date. Now I'm pleased to introduce our guest speakers for today. After being diagnosed with idiopathic PN in 2006, CJ Holliday started a support group in Greensboro, North Carolina. By 2014, he transitioned the group to online meetings, pioneering virtual support and coping strategies for peripheral neuropathy. CJ also maintains a free website, peripheralneuropathyresources.com, not affiliated with FPN, a PN Facebook page, and assists support group director D with a PN-focused podcast. CJ and his wife, Judy, have been married for 51 years. They have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. In 2012, CJ retired from Grainger and has since enjoyed travel, painting, and his active involvement in coping by leading peripheral neuropathy support groups. Also with us today is Brooke Gottesman, a licensed clinical social worker and certified health coach who has been providing mental health services since 2004. She is currently in private practice in Long Island, New York, specializing in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Her practice, Mind Body Connection Therapy, LLC, offers specialization to individuals managing chronic pain in addition to general clinical practice. Brooke began her own journey with chronic pain and peripheral neuropathy in 2013. The road to her diagnosis was lengthy and led to some years being significantly in bed. Brooke realized that through her own personal experience with chronic pain and neuropathy, she could empathize with those with similar conditions. She is also proud to have established a support group on Long Island, New York, to help others with their journey with pain and help create a sense of community and support in the area. Please give a warm welcome to our guests today. And as I want to let everyone know that today's session is going to be a little bit different from our past sessions. We'll begin with short remarks from CJ and then transition into the bulk of our time together, which is a pre-planned question and answer section with Brooke and CJ. We will wrap up our session today with an audience question and answer. So CJ, the virtual floor is now yours. You can go ahead and turn on your camera. Let's talk.
All right. Guess I can do that.
See that green button right there. There we go. We can see you just fine. How are you?
I'm good, considering I have peripheral neuropathy. Maybe I should say fair to middling. How about that? Um, yeah, my opening remarks here. First, thank you everybody for joining us. I always feel like when we have sessions like this, whether it's my monthly support group sessions or something off the foundation, I always feel like I'm surrounded by friends and people who know what I'm going through, and I understand what they're going through. And I think to start with my opening remarks, I'd like to start at the very beginning, and that's first just a quick remedial look at what PN or peripheral neuropathy is. You've got a brain, I hope, and you've got a spinal column. That's your central nervous system. The nerves that branch out to your extremities, your arms and legs, that's your peripheral nerves. And so often a peripheral neuropathy is a problem of length-dependent nerves going out first. That's what peripheral neuropathy is. There are other kinds of neuropathy, some more serious, none more aggravating or debilitating. So how serious is peripheral neuropathy? Well, I had somebody just got a diagnosis a while ago, and she was very concerned about what it meant for her. She had idiopathic, which is a word which means that the doctors don't know. And it's so easy to think in terms of, more serious diseases. This one is serious, but we have a saying that we're going to die with it, but not from it. So it's just going to make you feel worse and worse and worse and worse and worse as time goes on. And so what can you do about that? Well, we have to develop these coping strategies. We have to accept that we have it and then develop coping strategies to deal with it and go on with our lives, not let it interrupt our lives too much. So what causes neuropathy? Well, anybody's guess. Everybody's got a personal theory on what caused the neuropathy. And the doctors, the neurologist will tell you what a possible cause is. I don't think neurologists really know either. They just tell you what they think it could be, and then people adopt that and say, well, that's what caused it. I have the rather gonzo outlook on what causes neuropathy, that maybe we just outlive our nerve endings. We outlive our hair and our teeth and our eyesight and these other parts that don't make it for the long haul. Maybe we just outlive our nerve endings too. I don't know. Mine is idiopathic. Nobody knows, including me. So what can you do about it? Well, there's two spheres in the neuropathy world. There's the lab techs and the people who are trying to cure it. And then there is coping with it. And for my peripheral neuropathy monthly meetings, our emphasis is on coping with neuropathy. What can you do until they find a cure? And so that's what we try to focus on. And there are things. Of course, there's medical things. I feel like sometimes people jump on medicine a little too quickly. They'll say to the neurologist, once they figured out what this is that they have, and that's what can I do about it? And the neurologist will say, well, I can give you gabapentin or Lyrica or whatever. I think sometimes people jump on those things a little too soon, but that is that's a personal decision what you do about it as far as medicinal cures or therapies. Other things are just things like how you handle it mentally. That's why we have Brooke here. And how you handle it physically. Like, do you need a walker, a cane? I always say you go from furniture and wall steady down to cane steady, down to walker steady, and then finally into a wheelchair. somewhere along the line, you have to give up driving. You have to be cognizant of the fact that it's getting more difficult to feel the brake pedals and things. And you don't want to drive through a closed garage door or down the side of a hillside, or worse, up onto a sidewalk because you're trying to find the brakes. So be very cognizant of your driving, because the neuropathy is so far not going to get better. It's just going to get worse. Well, that's my opening remarks, and I think we would like to hear from Brooke now on how the chronic nature of peripheral neuropathy affects a person's mental health over time. I guess, April, you were going to introduce Brooke there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brooke, if you want to come on camera here, just press that little green button. Awesome. CJ, before we transition over, if you want to keep your camera on, we'd still love to see you.
Okay.
I would love some additional context about why you started a support group, because I think that there's kind of one thing about coming from a patient perspective, and then there's maybe like an extra spark that you might have had to start a support group. So CJ, I'd love to hear your remarks, and then Brooke, let's start with you, and then we'll get into our questions. So CJ, what are your thoughts?
Peripheral neuropathy was baffling to me. I thought I had a problem with circulation, because that's why I was getting numb and stingy. And the neurologist, very matter-of-factly, he didn't have a great bedside manner. Very matter-of-fact, he said, "No, it's your nerves decaying. They're going bad." And I thought, how can that be? So I started, well, that went on for a year or so, where I just walked around knowing I had neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy. And then I ran into somebody who also had it. And he said, do you get those stabbing pains? I said, yes, they're awful. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I do. I take about 3 ibuprofen or extra strength Tylenol and walk around to get it into my system. And usually after about an hour, that'll get rid of the stabbing pains. Well, like a light bulb went off in my head. It's like, there are other people who have this, and they have ideas on how to cope with it. And so I started I thought, I've got to start a group and get people around me who can talk to me about how they cope with it. And so I started a in-person support group, and that went on for a few years, but I kept getting people calling me from another part of the state. I'm in North Carolina, and saying, I'd like to come to your meetings, but it's a long way. And that caused me to look into online. And so in 2014, I started online a rather poor platform called Ubu. I don't even know if Ubu's still around. But anyway, and quickly, within 2 years, I transitioned to Zoom. And I've had Zoom meetings ever since. And it's really nice, because in our last Zoom meeting, we had somebody from Italy, and we had somebody from Canada and from England. And so it makes it kind of an international group. And all of these people, they're eager to share ideas about how they cope with their neuropathy. And it's good to be surrounded by friends like that. So
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing, CJ. So Brooke, what was your experience kind of transitioning from being a patient to now being a leader for a support group?
It's a great question. I think definitely having been in the mental health field already before my diagnosis played a role. I became very passionate about feeling like the biggest thing is, or one of the biggest, obviously there's many factors when you end up with a chronic illness, and especially a lot of these illnesses that are neurologic, they don't exactly know why they're happening, what's causing them, right? So, to CJ's point earlier, when he was saying, you're not going to die from it, right? I recall personally, I was bedbound for 4 years and I thought I was going to die. I didn't see any way out because it was so inhumane. And I felt very isolated. I felt very alone. I remember going through the stages of grief. There's 5 different stages: the grief, the anger. I went through all the roller coaster of emotions, and eventually I just, what? It's like when you hit rock bottom and you feel like you have to tell yourself, there's no other way. Things have to get better. So I just really try to get myself to that point where I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to give up and get better. And as I started to get better, I saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and I said, you know, there's so many people out there, and I can't even imagine, you know, before I started the group, and also started working with chronic pain patients. And I said, if we can feel like we have community, we have support, it's validation, you know, it's so helpful. And I also originally started with my support group to be more specific to my area, only just because, you know, in terms of you can get referrals and it makes things a little easier. I do open up my group to people out of state, just like CJ was saying, you know, as long as it's an appropriate fit, because I do Zooms, just like CJ was saying, and I also do meetups. So that's a nice thing about mine's for Long Island. I can get people from Manhattan. It depends on, you know, whereabouts. But it's really nice because we get to meet up, and again, just a sense of community is so important in terms of the mental health scene and how they go hand in hand. And in fact, I named my business. I used to work for an agency, and then I decided to go into private practice, and I really fully understood the mind-body connection and how important that is. And I just became very passionate about helping people with chronic pain because I can really, truly understand it now. And I think in terms of one of the things I know we're going to get into, but, you know, feeling hopeless is, you know, finding things that you're passionate about and channeling your energy into that. And I became very passionate about this work group. It gave me a sense of purpose and also, you know, learning and getting better so I could be a better therapist to help my patients.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Brooke. I think as I had shared, sometimes there's a spark moment of, okay, I wanted to take this a step further. And for some that's volunteering, for some that's giving of their resources. But thank you both and commend you both for taking that next step and becoming a leader, because as you both said, feeling alone is one of the worst things that you can do in any form of diagnosis. So finding that sense of community is key for sure. Okay, let's dive into some questions here. So first question, and this one is kind of geared towards CJ. So what are some common emotional responses that individuals experience when diagnosed with peripheral neuropathy? And maybe CJ can start and then Brooke can chime in too.
Bewilderment is usually the first. It's like me. I thought I had a circulation issue, and I wonder how many of our grandparents or great grandparents had peripheral neuropathy and thought it was circulation. You know, they didn't know what it was. So there's confusion, and then there's, what do I do about this? Can it be cured? That's the first question that pops to mind. There are very few neuropathies that can be cured. You have to attack the cause. Most neuropathies, there's no known cause or idiopathic. So you wind up having to live with it and cope with it. And that's where coping skills comes in. And by the way, I'm going to plug my website just a little bit, peripheralneuropathyresources.com. I believe, it's a big statement I'm about to make, but I believe I have more coping tips on that website than exists anywhere else in the world. Now, if somebody could show me where I'm wrong, I will amend that brag. But there's so many coping tips on there. You can get bored reading them all. But that's a good place to look for coping. Brooke, I'll throw it to Brooke.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, you know, the stages of grief, you know, the initial, I would say, emotions that people experience when they're first diagnosed, or even just trying to find a diagnosis but know something is seriously or significantly wrong, is, you know, the anger, the resentment, shock. And that's when you start to get into the stages of grief, of denial, bargaining, and so on and so forth. And that's when I was saying earlier, you know, it just becomes like a roller coaster ride of emotions. I know personally for myself, when I didn't know exactly what was going on, they had some ideas and so on and so forth. But when I was bedbound, I literally said to myself, like, and I hear this from my patients a lot, you know, not initially, but when you dig deeper, I always call it, it's like peeling away an onion when you're talking about emotions. Underneath, people feel like, well, wow, I must have done something wrong to deserve this. And that's, you know, very, very deep.
Yeah, everybody searches for that thing that might have caused it. You know, I had in the 80s, I ran every day for 3 straight years. So long that it became, I had to give it up intentionally. I had to pick a day and say, I'm not going to run that day. It became an obsession. Okay, so now years later, I got peripheral neuropathy. My thoughts go to that. Did running on all that pavement cause this? And other people, you know, I worked in a chemical factory. That must have caused it. Everybody's got an idea of why they have it, including what the neurologist might have told them. So that could have been genetic. And you know, I kind of buy into that too. I think it could be genetic, but I don't think we really know. And it's important to know to develop a cure. We have to know how this all started. Till then, that's where coping comes in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's where our foundation comes in too, right? Like
that's the foundation for peripheral. Which is a great group. I initially joined the foundation when it was in New York City. And that fell apart pretty quickly. Well, I think it was around for years. And when I joined it, it fell apart pretty quickly. And I was so glad it popped up again. You're in Indianapolis, I think, aren't you? Or near it.
We're based in the Chicago suburbs, but I mean, a huge part of the work that we do is kind of creating that pipeline for treatments and research to exist, and kind of advocating for the entire patient population at the highest level.
Yeah, you cover the cure aspect of it as well.
Exactly. But
because there needs to be somebody keeping an eye on companies like Winsantor. We're constantly announcing that they're close to a cure, but then, you know, maybe they will, but it hasn't come about yet. So it's important that we have an organization that keeps up with that. Thank you.
Exactly. And we also exist for experiences like this with our patient population as well. Uplifting the patient voice is a huge part of the work that we do as well. But I did want to make mention of just kind of the myriad of emotional experiences that happen with the diagnosis, and also just echo the frustration for our community when the diagnosis is idiopathic, and that can be very, very frustrating. And I would just encourage anyone who specifically does have idiopathic peripheral neuropathy, or really any neuropathies, to seek support groups like the ones that Brooke and CJ are a part of, whether it's just one meeting that you're attending or you're going every single month or every week. Getting more involved in your diagnosis and being more educated about it is one of the best ways that you can help combat the loneliness and the emotions that you might experience. But let's move on to our next question here. So this will be for Brooke. How can the chronic nature of peripheral neuropathy affect a person's mental health over time?
So, you know, another great question. You know, over time, we start to see more and more people who are experiencing depression, anxiety. There's, you know, a lot of data in terms of people getting involved in addiction, substance abuse. In fact, an estimated 35 to 45% of people with chronic pain experience depression, and chronic pain disrupts, you know, all aspects of our life, which, you know, we'll get into more of that as well. But then it starts to break down, you know, relationships, the isolation comes in, and sleep disruption is a huge piece that we see, and just the overall impaired social interactions.
That makes sense. Okay. So CJ, can you talk a little bit about the concept of chronic pain and the psychological effects on individuals with peripheral neuropathy? I'm sure you've got a lot of experience hearing lots of stories from your support group.
You know, the psychological effect varies. I always say that there are warriors. They go everywhere. They've been to the Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic. They've been to Vanderbilt. They've tried every therapy, hyperbaric chambers, and IVIG, and whatever else comes along. Those are the warriors, and I like them. They spend a lot of money. And then there's what I would call the everyman. That's us, and we join support groups and we read about it. We do what we can. We periodically go to a neurologist for an update, but we don't go overboard with it. And then there are the people who just don't care. There's probably millions of people out there that have peripheral neuropathy and they shrug it off and say, well, I have it. And that's sort of their mental attitude or approach to it, is that they don't really do anything about it. They don't think they can do anything about it. And that's fine too. I don't fault anybody for their approach. But anyway, chronic pain is persistent pain. It gets worse over time. If you can picture a blank sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, turn it on its side, blank sheet of paper, put a dot in the upper left corner and a dot in the lower right corner, and then draw a straight line down to the lower right corner dot. Everybody is somewhere on that line. And so you get people I get people in meetings who say, well, it's not really that bad. I just want to know where it's going. And then it goes all the way down to where you're giving up driving and you're having to use a cane and your balance is severely affected. So everybody is somewhere on that line, but it does degrade. It goes downhill slowly. Just a micro difference every day. Over time, it adds up, and before you know it, you've got issues that you didn't have when you started out. So I've forgotten the original question. It was emotionally how people deal with it. I hope, because that's sort of what I answered. I'll let Brooke answer that.
Yeah, well, to your point, CJ, it really creates a significant level of uncertainty. And I would say a huge thing that I see both with my own experience, but also my patients and just even friends that I know that live with these types of conditions is the fear of the unknown. Just like CJ, you're saying, like the progression, well, we don't know when is that going to happen? When am I not going to be able to walk, or am I potentially not going to be able to walk and then take care of my kids? Am I going to be able to work? Like it just snowballs. And I think the fear of the unknown and uncertainty is the biggest key and the most important piece, one of the most important pieces to address.
It's persistent.
Yeah.
This is the stinging numbness in all four limbs doesn't go away. It just gets a little worse every day. It's persistent. That's what chronic pain is.
Yeah.
You got to deal with it. I'm on Lyrica. Lots of people use gabapentin, triptyline sometimes. New things come along that people try.
Yeah, that's a whole other piece is, what treatment is. There's the medical side, right? And there's where we come in and other, treatment options, which again, we'll get into later. But really, it's research has just demonstrated how important it is to address the uncertainty as part of the treatment plan.
One treatment plan that people will tend to overlook, but it's so important, is figure out sleep. You've got to sleep at night. Figure it out. There's different ways to do it. I take Ambien. Some people take Ambien and they wind up 2 blocks away or have nightmares. So that didn't work for them, but it works for me. Something else might work for somebody else, but consult with your doctor and sleep at night. That's really important. Hot feet is one of the big problems, and a coping tip there is you can get little bed risers at the end of your bed that you can put your hot feet under them. So there are coping tips even when it comes to sleep, but figure that out. That's really important.
Yeah, it's definitely a holistic approach, right? When you're approaching mental health, is getting comfortable with the uncomfortable sometimes is a good perspective to start
Yeah,
with.
a psychiatrist friend of mine told me once that with a new patient, that's the very first thing they talk about. How are you sleeping? How can we get you to sleep?
Yep, and keeping that conversation open with your team, your medical team, your mental health team, making sure that folks know what's going on with you, and so you're not feeling so alone in this. But let's get back on track with some of the strategies for coping with pain and discomfort. So, Brooke, what are some effective mental strategies for managing chronic pain, and what are maybe some success stories that you've seen in the patients that you work with?
Sure. In terms of success stories with patients that I personally worked with, I would say, the first piece is the acceptance. That's step one. And there's a type of therapy that I was going to get into a little bit later in another question, but it's called ACT. I really believe personally, and from doing research, I've even attended some trauma conferences, and they're showing that variations of cognitive behavioral therapy, there's offshoots now. So there's MCBT, which is mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy, which again, I'll get into all the mindfulness and stuff in some of the other questions. But I would say really learning how to restructure the way that you think, and like countering evidence against the thoughts that are some of us were plagued with all day, 24/7, and some of it's subconscious, and really bringing it to the forefront. And then the acceptance piece, using ACT is a way of helping people learn how to learn to just accept and acknowledge that there's, this is what's in front of you. If you focus on kind of like more victim mentality, right? That is going to be counterproductive as opposed to saying, okay, well, I have this. How can I move forward? What can I do with it? Or focusing on the things that you can do and that you do have control over. Really helps people learning how to cope.
Okay. So it's let me interrupt here real quick, Brooke. So is ACT an acronym? What does that stand for? Something?
It's acceptance commitment therapy.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. I thought I wrote it down, so I want to make sure I didn't.
No problem. But yeah, I think I started to do a little research on with trauma, because really dealing with chronic pain and illnesses is a form of trauma, right? And everybody's trauma and experience is different, but you could definitely combine cognitive behavioral therapy, so CBT, and or even MCBT, the mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy, with ACT. And they're starting to show a lot of research on how it's the most effective way to treat people who have chronic pain.
The best inspiration that I found for mindfulness is your dog. They are in the moment all the time. They have no worries, except, is it dinner time? They're just constantly looking around and listening for things, and they are very mindful. They're in the moment. Mindfulness is one of many important things you can do for distraction. That's really what we're trying to do, is distract you. I used to say, if I played a 10-minute pickleball game, that was 10 minutes I didn't have peripheral neuropathy. I wasn't thinking about it. And I've kind of aged out of pickleball now. I'd kill myself if I tried it. But any painting, if you're painting, anything you can do to distract is maybe the very best thing you can do.
Yeah, no, distraction is, and that's something also too I wanted to get into, but in addition to distraction, just really finding the person that you feel like you can be vulnerable with and sharing your emotions as opposed to bottling them up. Because what happens is, I like to use the expression, right? If you kind of push down everything that you're feeling. It's like a pot that's on the stove and it's boiling and you walk away. What's going to happen, right? The water's going to boil over. And that's, a whole other story of, maladaptive coping, as we call it, right? So it's just so important to find a sense of community, a support network, I would say is like the #1 key thing before anything else, so that you feel like you're not alone. Talking about what you're going through, and then, being kind to yourself. Going back to the cognitive behavioral therapy, my experience with patients who've had trauma and or chronic pain, and again, the general population too. There's so many people walking around. We have these subconscious thoughts and we're putting ourselves down or beating ourselves up. Just like I used, so it's called the cognitive distortion or limiting belief. When I was saying earlier, I must have done something wrong to deserve this, right? So if I'm walking around saying this to myself all day, of course I'm going to get depressed and anxious, and then it's going to fuel my mental health and then also affect your physical health, which there's tons of data out there about, how they all go hand in hand. But by being kind to yourself and giving yourself grace, like look for the little wins, So if you start a new medication and you were able to stand up for 5 minutes when you couldn't stand for any minutes, as opposed to just focusing on all the things that you can't do, right?
That's a really good point. I know I can still walk from one room to the other, most of the time without a cane, and sometimes having to put a hand on the wall or a piece of furniture. But hey, I used to drive. I can't drive anymore. I'm just happy now I can walk. I can walk from one room to another. So, keep on the sunny side. I think it's
Yeah.
good.
Perspective is everything. It definitely can be. So, Brooke, you've touched on a lot of things. You both have talked about mindfulness, but would you be able to talk about a little bit more of routine, habit building, and kind of consistency as you're working on mindfulness, you're working on physical exercise? Like, kind of how does that all play into coping?
So, in terms of structure is very important, as you're saying, and consistency. It's very easy and very common that I see someone will say, oh, I tried yoga once and it didn't work. Well, it's just like medication. You can't, most medications, right? You can't take it once and say it doesn't do anything. It could take weeks, months. Every medication is different. So you really have to be consistent to see the effects and really be able to evaluate if it works for you. So that's, consistency, structure is just very helpful, kind of.
Keeping a schedule, and you have to get out of your brain. If you stay in your brain too much, you're going to concentrate on what ails you, and there's this whole world going on. And try to get out of your brain and into that world. None of this is easy. I'm telling people that are in a lot of pain listening to this. You think, oh, you think it sounds so easy? It is not easy. It's just something you have to do. I like what Brooke said about keeping a regular schedule. That can be very helpful.
Yeah, and kind of stretching those habit muscles, right? So
habit muscles.
Starting something small at the beginning of the day. So you might not be able to walk for 15 minutes, but maybe you could walk for 2 minutes. And
I know a guy who walks
nothing.
No, a guy walks 2 miles with a walker.
And that goes back
to it.
I was trying to say before, you want to give yourself some grace. Like, you're not going to be able to go from, saying being bed bound to doing an hour of yoga. Maybe it's even just 5 minutes. Give yourself a pat on the back. Don't discount the positive. That's where again, the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, we look for different types of thought patterns that are getting in the way of how you're feeling emotionally. Mindfulness has really become more and more something that in the mental health field we are focusing on it, but also, you know, getting data-driven information to show how effective it is. And there's different types of mindfulness. So, you know, it's not cookie cutter. You know, for you, April, like you might like yoga, and there's different types of yoga. For me, it might be meditation. And again, there's so many different types of meditation. I can't even keep up anymore. You know, so it's just about trying things, being open and flexible to trying things and seeing what works for you.
I think the best exercise, and unfortunately most of us can't do it, but the best exercise is a swimming pool. Get in a pool and walk in a pool. I learned that from the FPN. He said, don't just swim in a pool, you can walk in a pool. And it's easier on the joints and everything. And it also contributes to mindfulness, because when you're in the pool exercising, you know, you're having to remember to stay afloat. I mean, you're in the moment in the pool. So if you have access to one, that's the best, I think, exercise for peripheral neuropathy.
And in terms of, just to say this real quick, you know, the reason why mindfulness is so important is it helps you to refocus and retrain your brain to focus on something else. Just to give a quick example, you know, say you have a painting in front of you, it's beautiful flowers, and you really love this painting. If you sit there and you focus on it, it's a form of distraction. That's really what this is. And it helps to train your brain to get out of the habit of just these ruminating, which means like ongoing negative thoughts, or we call it like the cognitive emotive loop, where you're just constantly beating yourself up over and over. So the mindfulness, there's a lot to it, and I know I'm being very basic about it, but I just wanted to share how even starting small with the mindfulness is a way to start to help to retrain your brain to get out of focusing on things that are not necessarily positive or helpful.
Yeah, I've done yoga, and I think it's very good. They say Qigong, is it Qigong? I've heard that's very good for neuropathy. I have no idea. But if you have a Qigong class near you, you might look into it.
Spend 10 hours on like different types of stuff, and yeah, there's just so much out there now.
Yeah, I feel like the three of us could talk forever.
Qigong in a swimming pool, that's perfect.
Great.
Now what's next?
Yeah, so thank you both. We're actually kind of running out of time at the moment because this has been such a really good conversation. So I want to transition into some of our audience questions that have come in. So I'm going to read a few of these. One has come in from Erin, who mentions, how can I get my loved ones to understand something that they can't see? How can I help them cope with their frustration? So thank you so much for this question, Erin, and I'm so glad you asked this. So CJ, would you want to start, and then maybe Brooke, you can chime in too?
I don't know. I think I may have to throw it to Brooke. I think it's extremely difficult to get people who don't have, just explaining what neuropathy is, what the pain is like, is extremely difficult to explain to people. And you almost have to, if you've got a spouse or something, just ask them to accept it. Just, you know, just believe me. I can't really make you feel this. Or what do you say, Brooke?
I have to say that's a fantastic question. You know, one of the things, I know we didn't get to all the questions, but one of the biggest things is stigma that people worry about. And then also there's the invisible illness, right? There's some of us, we have trouble walking and so on and so forth, but overall, it's considered an invisible illness. And it's really hard because what I hear over and over from people, and or even my own limiting beliefs and fears is, oh, well, you know, people said, oh, I look great, but meanwhile, I could be screaming in pain, right? So I'm like, do they think I'm lying when I say I can't do something or go to something? And for family members, it's very common to hear this all the time, just to normalize, what you're experiencing. I think the best way is if they're open to it, there are support groups for family members. In fact, CJ, correct me if I'm wrong, or if it's somebody else in the Neuropathy Foundation has had support groups where family members can join. I know on Facebook, social media, I wanted to mention, it's an amazing resource. There's thousands of groups. Sometimes just asking them to join, or you could send them an invite, and hopefully they'll accept it. And just seeing from other patients what they're writing. And you're going to see themes over and over. And this one in particular, the invisible illness, and how do I get people to really understand that I am struggling and I'm not making this up. I'm not lazy. That's another, thing that becomes a limiting belief to us, because everybody tells us, oh, you're just lazy and you don't want to do this, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah, it begs the question of how much should your spouse push you? Because my wife will say, oh, you can do. I'll say, I don't think I can do that. She, oh, you can do that. I know how I feel, but she might be right. If I would try, maybe I could still do more than I think I can. Really good question, and complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of goes back to, as we've been talking about, keeping that open sense of dialogue and communication going. And sometimes you do just got to lift up your hands and say, I can't help you fully understand this, but here's a link to the support group that I'm a part of, or here's a link to the foundation's website, or something else that you found online that's been helpful, because knowledge is power, and as people become more informed about your condition, they can help better support you. So it's kind of
a few years ago, I invited spouses to join us in our monthly support group meeting, and I thought, well, a few. Now everybody was wild about it. Almost everybody had a spouse join. I got to do that again. I'm glad you reminded me of that, Brooke. I need to do that again.
And just sorry, one quick other thing that I thought of is, if you're able to, depending on, your situation, and also your family members being willing or open to do this, but sometimes, family counseling. But I would say somebody who really has some expertise and understanding of chronic pain.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good suggestion, Brooke. Thank you. Okay, so I did want to just remind our audience that there are some questions that are coming in specifically about treatment recommendations. We do have other webinars that we've posted over the last couple of weeks that I would encourage you to take a look at those, and we do have some more webinars coming up. So hopefully that will help you answer those questions. We're just not going to be able to get to them today. But we do have a question coming in from Melanie. Are there any suggestions on what mental health exercises can be done when feeling overwhelmed and hopeless with the pain from neuropathy? Is there anything that has helped you or your patients or people in your support group? So we've talked about
this is one for strategies today. But I will say this: movement is medicine. Get up and move. You'll always feel better. With that, I'll throw that one to Brooke. That question.
Okay, and let me just reiterate that the portion of this question that I want to get to was the feeling specifically of overwhelm and hopelessness. So Brooke, could you speak a little to that?
Yeah, and first of all, I just want to normalize that, and I think, as I shared in the beginning, to an extent, when I was bedbound, I really felt hopeless. I thought I was going to have to end my career. And I was, I was going to get into some other stuff today about, like, you worry about finances or so many things that come into play. But in terms of how do you get yourself out of feeling hopeless, it's easier said than done. But cognitive behavioral therapy, again, sorry to keep mentioning it, but it can really help. Even if you get a self-help workbook, it can help you to reframe your thought process. I would say outside of that, and the ACT, like helping with the acceptance, but finding things that you can do to distract yourself, and then see if you could try to find anything that you enjoy, that you're capable, because I know we have hobbies and things we've enjoyed and now we can't do them. I think finding a sense of purpose really will help go a long way when you start to feel hopeless, and it'll channel your energy into something else. And this is just the basics of beginning steps of how you can work on that feeling of hopelessness. I hope that answers your question. And I'm always happy if you have any other questions or want to talk further, if that's allowed, I'm happy to talk offline.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be big on next steps here after this presentation, so we can share contact information of how to get a hold of Brooke and CJ. There have been a couple questions that have come in about asking for information about the support group. So we will share all of that with everyone participating. Just be on the lookout for your inbox. And there are also some questions coming in about resources for ACT and mindfulness. So I'll pose this to you, Brooke. Outside of a Google search and finding things at Mayo and Johns Hopkins and like other research done on these types of mindsets, do you have any specific resources that you might want to share to point people in the right direction as they're doing their own research?
Yeah, actually, in terms of this the cognitive behavioral therapy and specific to chronic pain, as I mentioned, it's the #1 most proven effective evidence-based practice. There's an app called Curable, and you can use it without having to pay. I think there's some stuff, I'm not sure what you could get more of if you paid, but there's a lot of stuff you can get free using that type of an app. I know there's also an app called Headspace that a lot of my patients love to use. It has some mindfulness incorporated into that. Otherwise, in terms of like workbooks or resources, I just off the top of my head, I would, I'm happy to, if we send another email to the participants or something with a list of resources, I'm more than happy to put something together. In terms of like the ACT, I think off the top of my head.
No, I think that's honestly really helpful just to get started with a few options, but this has given me some ideas. Maybe moving forward, our foundation can do some additional resources coming out to our community, talking specifically about mindfulness. We've heard a lot from our community about, coping and how do I do this? And some folks maybe don't want the full sense of community and want to feel empowered individually. So we can send some resources in the coming weeks. So be on the lookout for that. I want to make sure everyone gets as much information as they can. If not, Google's your best friend, one of your best friends. Just making sure that you're looking at reputable resources is something that we would always encourage. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and just real quick, because I was able to find it super fast. The person who actually is like the founder of ACT and Acceptance Commitment Therapy, there's a book called Living Beyond Your Pain, Using Acceptance and Commitment Therapy to Ease Chronic Pain. It's by Dan, D-A-N-N-E, Dahl, D-A-H-L, Ph.D.
Hey, thank you. So if you didn't get that written down, check the recording and we will have that shared with everyone. Okay, so
Yeah.
I think we might have time for one last question here. And I'm going to go back to some of the strategies for coping and coping with pain and discomfort that we had discussed earlier. So CJ, I'll start with you and then I'll lead over to Brooke. Can you share some practical tips for integrating relaxation techniques into daily routines to help alleviate pain and stress? So how do you relax?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mindfulness does some of that. Again, movement is medicine. If you just sit there, you're going to settle and the pain is going to increase and it doesn't help your balance. I'm going to be very interested in Brooke's answer on this one because getting involved in some kind of, I guess, physical activity, there's really nothing better for neuropathy than that outside of prescriptive medicines. So I really can't answer that. I'll get your mind somewhere else. I'll throw it to Brooke.
Yeah, no problem. There's a couple of things you can do for relaxation. As we have mentioned, yoga. I know actually doctors, they're really pushing that in terms of physically for us, but also in terms of emotionally. That's why the mind-body connection, they're really pushing that. So there's that. There's the yoga.
Yeah, lead an active life to the extent that you can. The people I have that come to my meetings that have the most problems are the ones who are most stay-at-home types. And I may not help many people, but be active.
I would say the progressive muscle relaxation, yoga, meditation, I think it's really just about, I could go into the different types of like mindfulness, meditation. But, I think starting with simple things, as you mentioned, April, like Google's our friend, but so there's yoga with Adrienne. She's really what I like about her, and doctors have recommended her, and my patients have loved it. She's very gentle, easygoing, and I think it's a great place to start if you want to go with the yoga. The meditation, I think it's just a matter of trying the different types, and if you guys want me to get into it, I can. But really just do some research on what type of meditation there is, see what you think you'd be most interested in.
I think you need what I call proof of life. If you just sit around, you're over 70, thinking the end is near, all of your emotions are going to cave in on you. If you do something at least once a day that you might not normally do, I'm not talking about paint the house or walk the Appalachian Trail, just something simple. Get up and you don't want to make the bed, but you make the bed anyway. You don't want to go to the farmer's market, you go anyway. And these things are proof of life. They are you still being engaged, and that's critically important.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm so sorry to say, but we're almost at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to close out our session today. But thank you so much to both Brooke and CJ. This has been a very dynamic conversation, and I know I've definitely learned a lot. I wrote some notes down, and it's reminding me to be more present of my own breath and being more mindful and present in my own life. So thank you for this. We love to hear from our PN community, so please take the survey at the end of this webinar. It helps us provide better content for you moving forward. And also please consider making a $25 donation if you haven't yet already to the foundation, so we can continue to provide programs like this and expand our mission. You can use the QR code up on the screen. If you are on a desktop, you can just use your smartphone if you want to give that way. And our contact information and website are listed here as well. As I shared earlier, we will send some follow-up information about how to get in touch with Brooke and CJ specifically. So please don't swarm their inboxes, but maybe the best thing that you can do is join one of their support groups meetings. So on behalf of the entire team here at the foundation, we wish you health and bright days ahead. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your peripheral neuropathy journey, and have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, April.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.